how's your dog doing? So, you probably know about Toki Pona, that really simple language with about 100 words that you can learn in 2 days, right? This is kind of the popular view of Toki Pona. Let's be honest how popular Archon likes. Toki Pona is a really simple language that is super easy to learn and you'll become fluent within a week or something. However, consider this. A few weeks ago, Yanlipa Manka made a post on the Toki Pona subreddit comparing Toki Pona to the recorder. I'll get to this analogy later in the video, but I want to discuss how people think Toki Pona is simple and how some of these ideas are wrong. By the way, before we really get into the video, I just wanted to thank everyone who got my channel to 250 subscribers. I know that's not exactly a large amount, but the fact that 250 people want to watch me talk about topics I like is pretty cool. I'm not getting that kind of audience anywhere else. Anyway, on to the rest of the video. So, is Toki Pona simple in terms of its vocabulary? Yes and no. Sure, Toki Pona's vocabulary is rather small. 137 words is not much to work with. Toki Pona has 127 content words. Assuming that all of these words can be nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs, Toki Pona has 508 words. If you consider all the meanings that could come from all these different parts of speech, you could easily make Toki Pona have a few thousand words. Now, am I saying that Toki Pona has way more words than we think and that they're all just homophonic? No. Just because a language doesn't fit our traditional ideas as to how our language works does not mean that we should try to make it work within that framework. That's just prescriptivism. And if there's one thing that Toki Ponists are not, it's prescriptivists. I hope. In reality, Toki Pona words just have a variety of meanings. Just thinking of what all the meanings for each content word could be, words that can work as nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs, could be rather difficult. For example, what would telo be as an adverb? My idea is that it would mean fluidly because something that is being done fluidly is kind of like it being done in a water-like way. Or maybe you could say sama nasin telo to say fluidly. That's not the point. The point is that it takes quite a bit of thinking to even consider all the possible meanings of a word just in a vacuum, let alone in a real environment where things like culture can inform someone's interpretation of a word. Another point about the vocabulary is that for everything outside of the 137 words, you just have to describe it. While that does make it easy to learn the vocab, it makes it more difficult in actual use. You see, our brains don't really like thinking all that much. That's a lot of work. For our brains, it's a lot easier to just learn a new word for a new concept than for us to have to figure out what it is based on description. Essentially, what I'm describing is chunking. This is how speed readers can read so quickly. It's not necessarily that they can process information more quickly than the rest of us, though that could help. They just allow their brain to chunk the words. Take this for example. Is it easier to learn the words ink, dispensing, writing, and tool and put those together to describe this object? Or is it easier to just learn the word pen and say that forever? This whole chunking thing happens all the time in the Toki Pona community. Certain word phrases almost become lexicalized, meaning that they become a word, and the whole community says something in the same way. Some common examples of this are Yanpona, Tomotawa, Tenpo Suno, and Tenpo Pimea for friend, car, day, and night, respectively. Most beginners just learn these phrases as the way of conveying these concepts. This isn't against beginners at all. They should be taught that while common, these are not the only ways to describe these concepts. For example, you could describe a friend as Yan Bipana Ulin, a person of giving love. Sure, it's a little weird, but totally acceptable. You'll just have to keep in mind that other people might not understand what you're saying because Yanpona has become lexicalized in their minds. Our brains really want to lexicalize these concepts to make it easier for us, so they'll latch onto whatever they can to do that. You might even have some concepts lexicalized just for yourself. Maybe you've always called your journal your Lipupi Lon Mi, the book of my existence. Try coming up with a new way to say it to challenge your brain a little more. I'm going to be quite honest, one of the most beautiful parts of Toki Pona and the community is the fact that it naturally challenges your brain quite a lot. Sure, you might have to think about verb conjugations learning Bulgarian, but eventually you'll get used to it. Unless you allow words to become lexicalized to you, Toki Pona will always challenge you to think a little bit more. Toki Pona's grammar is actually pretty simple compared to most languages, but it does have its own limitations that make it a little more challenging, just like the vocabulary. For example, Toki Pona can't have dependent clauses in a sentence. For those who forgot what a dependent clause is, in a sentence like, I know that you are a Toki Ponist, that you are a Toki Ponist is the dependent clause. It cannot stand on its own. I know is still a valid sentence and can stand on its own. If you wanted to say that in Toki Pona, you'd have to say, Mi sona e ni, sina yan pi Toki Pona, which means, I know this, you are Toki Ponist. There are other things like this, but you probably already know about this. Now, we can get to that Reddit post by Yanlipa Manka that I was talking about. What's this whole thing about Toki Pona being like a recorder? Well, Yanlipa Manka's comparison is that, like a recorder, Toki Pona is easy to get the basics of, but is rather difficult to use well. I think this is something that every Toki Ponist will realize eventually. It's easy to memorize the vocabulary and the grammar. It's a lot harder to communicate using Toki Pona and regular conversation with other people. If there are any beginners watching this video wanting to get any more proficient in Toki Pona, I recommend using the Discord server, reading posts on the subreddit, or keeping a Toki Pona journal. I did the last method. I would write in Toki Pona in a notebook. I would just write whatever came to mind. It really expanded my ability to think in Toki Pona. I attribute my self-assessed proficiency in Toki Pona to writing in a notebook and reading what other people wrote on the subreddit. So Toki Pona, while seeming more simple than most languages you'll find out there, has its own nuances. This applies to every language. People think English is really easy, but there are a bunch of little details that can easily be missed, like proper adjective order, and the difference between I could have been running and I would have been running. Every language has its own quirks, which might be a little bit of a pain, are part of what makes learning languages fun. Alright, tell your dog I said hi. I know I just said in the last video that I wouldn't make so many videos relating to Toki Pona, but as soon as I posted the last video, all I could think about were ideas for other Toki Pona videos, including a follow-up to the last one involving Proto-Toki Pona. My next video might be the IPA Summarized Part 5, but I might also consider revamping some of the older ones in the future, because I don't think I was as clear with what I was explaining as I am now. I'm also considering redoing the Kamasona and Toki Pona series, or I would do them in a sort of natural method, similar to Lingua Latina per se illustrata. Alright, that's all.